What we're doing tonight, we asked you this past week, we asked you to ask us questions, because often we're doing a lot of the talking like I am doing right now, and we don't touch on everything. We're not able to get to absolutely everything you want us to get to, so we always want to give you an opportunity to ask us questions. What about this? What about that? And get into a bit of the nuance. And so we had you give us questions over 2 days, and then you got to vote on them over another day. And today, what we get to do is you get to vote live. There's going to be 2 sets of questions you get to choose from. So there'll be one question pitted against another one. And based on your live voting, that is the question that we'll actually get to. Now, if you're wondering, what about those questions that you don't get to? That's the part of this. That's why you got to be involved in it. And hopefully you had enough hot Cheetos to keep you interested, and not enough that you got to run to the can. So here's why we do this. Here's why we do this entire month, because some people say, why do you guys have to name things like Hand Solo? Why do you have to hot in the sheets, regret in the streets? Today it's like I could go on and on and on. And why do you talk about it? Well, to be honest, let me ask you a question. Where else are you going to get someone or an environment where you can get this many young adults in a room and you're talking about really, really important things that have to do with our sexuality and relationships? Where else are you going to get that? And we think that if we can be awkward, then we can kind of break the ice and we can kind of talk about anything. And I've always kind of, thought the project needed to be the place where you can talk about things that typically you shouldn't talk about, especially in church, and to kind of break those conversations open. But another reason why, and what really drives it, is literally, this is kind of the heart of why I kind of do anything. So I've been a pastor for about 13 years, and all of it has been next gen, all of it has been under 30. And this verse is something that drives me, and it drives tonight. So it's found in this book called Ephesians. If you're not familiar with the Bible, that's totally okay. It's in the new part of the Bible. It's written by this guy named Paul, and he's writing to a church in Ephesus. And in this book, Ephesians, he says this. He's like, listen, so be careful how you live. It sounds like really good advice. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. This sounds simple enough. Now, when you look at the Bible and you think fool and wise, the idea of foolishness are people who don't see the relationship with themselves, with God, and with others as something that has an impact on their life in the future. Whereas the wise people are the kind of people who understand that how they relate to God, how they relate to themselves and to others, totally impacts not just the present, but it impacts their future. So he says, be the kind of people who are careful the way you live, because the decisions you make today is going to have an impact not just today, but throughout the future. And when it comes to your relationship with God, your relationship with yourself and with other people. And so that's why we do these things, because the idea is we just want to help you to live carefully and to live like wise people. There's another verse in the Bible, I don't have it up here, but it says, a companion of if hang out with the wise, you become wise, but a companion of fools suffer much harm. The idea is if you hang out with people who are trying to make wise decisions, who understand that life is interconnected, then typically you become kind of like that person. But if you hang out with fools, it's not that you become a fool as much as you suffer harm. It's almost like if you got in the car with someone who's driving drunk. You may not be driving the vehicle, but you could suffer much harm because you got in the vehicle with them. And we want to help you sort through. When it comes to our sexuality and comes to relationships, we just want to help you stick with some wisdom, to be careful how you live, because it has such a big impact on you and on the people around you. Now, I will say this, I'm no expert. I'm no love guru, nothing like that. I didn't write a book. I'm not writing a book about this. This has just been years of working with couples. This has been years doing even counseling myself. This has been with my wife. This is a lot of research. And one of the greatest gifts I think God has given us is the fact that we have people who are very good scientists and who research and who study and who experiment and hypothesize what could be. And so this is just, how can I get all this information together and unpack it for you in a way hopefully you understand? So you're like, okay, whoa, let's just get to the questions. Let's get to them. So here's the thing. These are the 2 groups of questions that you guys voted were the ones you wanted to hear the most. So you got Group A and Group C1. Okay, I know the alphabet. I know B comes after A, but these are the 2 groups that won. These are the list of questions. And what we're going to do is I'm going to set up the first 2 set of questions. I'm going to give you 1 minute to vote on our Instagram. So you got to go to our Instagram. It's at the Project YEG. Go to our story and you can live vote it. And whichever one wins after that small time period is the one that I'll get after. So for example, the first one will be, how do you handle sexual desire as a Christian, and or most critical topics to discuss before engagement? Which one do you want to hear? And whichever one has the most votes wins. So let's get to it. The First question, how do I handle sexual desire as a Christian when single and dating? Or most critical topics to discuss before engagement. So it should be live on our story right now. So go ahead, if you haven't, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to vote. 65% of you are asking the question, what does healthy handling of sexual desire look like for a Christian in the single or dating stage? You're a horny bunch. And so, listen, I don't care about engagement. Just how do I keep my hands off myself? It's an important question. It's a really good question. And I'm only going to take about anywhere between 3 and 7 minutes to answer these questions. It's going to be a little rapid fire. I won't touch everything because I want to get to it all here. But how do I handle sexual desire as a Christian when single and dating? And there may be a qualifier there, and you say, why Christian? Well, there is a sexual ethic within Christianity that believes that there is a certain portion of our sexuality that should be reserved for marriage. And the reason why is because we just feel like being 100% physically vulnerable in a sense, and we feel like not only sex is something that is physical, that is great, that is awesome, that God made and you should celebrate. We also think that it's something that is spiritual. We think it's when two people have sex, there is a spiritual transaction that happens as well. And there's a sense of commitment that, hey, listen, when I give myself to you wholly, when you give yourself to me wholly, it's the idea of like you're going to do it in a safe environment, in a committed environment, in a place where we've decided we're going to build our life together. So that's why the qualifier is in there. But maybe, I don't think you have to be a Christian to ask this question though. How do I keep it? Because really, really interesting. Even just today I learned from a young adult that I trust that comes here and she's studied some of the stuff. Her name's Lindsay. If you're in the room, you know which Lindsay I'm talking about. And it's kind of what we've shared a bit in the past, this past month as well. When couples especially begin forming a relationship and they begin forming the physical thing, the physical aspect of it, there's this chemical that's released in our brains, kind of the same as kids when they're being breastfed and stuff like that. And it's meant to break down barriers to build trust very quick. And when we get physical with each other, the same thing happens. It's in order to bring up vulnerability and to bear down walls that would build trust. The only problem though, is that very often it masks a lot of other issues that you have. It can actually make you feel more intimate than you really are. And so here's what I would say. For those of you who are kind of single and you're like, listen, you know, I'm 20-some years old, I'm having a really hard time like keeping it in check. Let me encourage you. Okay, the first thing is this. The idea is not to get how close to the line before you cross it. It's a bad place to start. It's like, how much can I do with myself before it gets really bad, right? Can I just find like a friend with benefits? Can I find someone who, you know, like whatever, it's not serious, it's not dating, it's just someone that we can kind of like enjoy each other's bodies and whatever. And I'd say this, if you are constantly putting yourself in a position where it's actually going to make it harder for you to abstain from it, that's your fault. That's not your body or God, okay? You know, if you are someone who's enticing that area of your life over and over again, if you're someone who consistently watches porn, if you're someone who's always engaging movies and things like that, that really just kind of glorify the idea of just like get what you want, when you want it, how you want it, guess what? You're gonna struggle with it. Because sexuality, no one here is like, you know, it's more of an instinct, right? So no one's like, hey, listen, do you wanna have sex? No, why don't we do trigonometry together, right? Like no one, that's not a hard debatable thing. It's like, yeah, of course, right? It's a bit of an instinct. The problem is though, is when you keep feeding the instinct, it actually gets harder and it normalizes things for you that should be the way it is. And so I would say this, get some form of accountability in your life where you're being honest, like, listen, I'm having a really hard time. It's a certain moment or season in my life, things are really stressful and hard. And often we go to sexuality and go to like porn or masturbation or things like that when we're in stressful times because we want to cope with it. But if you create that as a coping mechanism, what you do is you're not bringing increased freedom into your life. You're bringing increased, what's the word? Bondage. Sure, yeah, that's a good one. I'm scared to use bondage because like, what about bondage? And you know, you increase the risk of that becoming normalized for you. So find accountability where you can be honest with someone going, I'm having a really hard time, and keep each other accountable that way. That's really, really good. The other thing too is watch what you watch and watch what you take in. It's like if you're on a diet of McDonald's all the time, you ain't gonna be feeling good after a couple of weeks. And so if your diet is consuming sexuality and all the time, it's gonna be really difficult for you. If all your Instagram people you follow are just like people with these crazy bodies and just like using sex to sell things, guess what? That's what you're gonna feel is normal. It's going to continue to entice you that direction. Take stock of what you're allowing into your head and your eyes. It's gonna make it that much harder. But talk about it. Talk about your struggle with someone. It's keeping you accountable. And if you're dating, I'd say the same thing. Create boundaries. Know your boundaries and have someone keep you accountable to it. Listen, if you're hanging out with your boyfriend or girlfriend, your significant other, beyond like 10 o'clock at night, and you're watching a movie alone in the basement, lights are off, candles are lit, what do you think's gonna happen? You know, sex doesn't just happen. It's like, no, seriously, like I ended up naked on top of her and it just happened, right? It doesn't just happen. So create those boundaries, know them, understand them, and have someone keep accountable to it, because at 10:30, you're not thinking, remember our boundaries? I think you need to watch the location where yourself in, and I'll say the same thing. If your question is how close to the line can we get before crossing it, you're already asking the wrong question. It's, how do I respect the boundaries you set for yourself and I set for myself? And that honors our personhood, that honors the boundaries, and make sure that we're gonna do this in a good way. If you're having a hard time, then talk with your significant other going, listen, your body's hot and my body's hot for it. We need to be careful here. We just gotta watch it. We gotta talk about it. Now, another thing, actually I won't go because I know it's another question and it goes into it, so I won't answer right now, but that's some of the things, but the biggest thing is find some accountability people to keep you. Watch over it, and secondly is just make sure you're not thinking how close to the line can I get before I cross it. Be very careful. Figure out what's really appropriate for us. But I'll say this, if you start off hot and heavy, that's kind of the way your relationship's gonna go. So start off slow and steady. Yo, that's Twitter material right there. Okay, next set of questions, because I gotta move on. There's more I could say, but we gotta move on, and it's this. Why am I so scared to be alone? How do I cope? When is it appropriate to share deep past experiences like assault, abuse, past relationships, things like that? That is what's up. I'm gonna give you another minute to answer those questions. Go ahead. All right. 55% of you said that you wanna know, why am I so scared to be alone? And how do I cope with that? So far, group A it's 2-0. By the way, Amanda was actually supposed to be with me because I think it's really important to have perspective from the feminine side. Unfortunately, she is super sick this weekend, and so she can't be with me. So if you're praying type, pray for her. If you're someone who throws dimes into fountains, throw one for her too. Why am I so scared to be alone, and how do I cope with that? What a really great question. To be honest, this is a bit of a difficult question to answer because I actually don't know why you're so scared to be alone. There's so many stories in this room. Oftentimes it can be traced back to kind of your history. Oftentimes we bring our family history into our adult years. And so if you feel like you had a lack of attention or lack of love or lack of connection with parents or whatever the background is, that could actually contribute to you feeling like, I don't want to be alone. Sometimes it is like you're someone who was a serial dater and you dated all the time. You never liked being alone. And so it perpetuates the idea of like, I'm so scared to be alone. Maybe for you, it's just what you mean by this is, I'm so scared of being 40 years old and having 10 cats. Like I'm scared of ending up alone. And so there's a lot of variables in this question. And so forgive me if I don't hit on your exact variable, but let me be as broad as possible. One is this, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, okay? I think one of the reasons why we feel so alone feel so lonely is because we've never learned the art of being alone. Being alone is not a bad thing. Being alone is a human thing. It's being alone with who you are and understanding that there are things in us that we're happy about and things about us that we're not very happy about. But sometimes, especially when it comes to we live our lives online and we live our lives comparing ourselves to one another. We live our lives looking for social affirmation constantly. That we feel like we're always having to adjust ourselves and our expectations of ourselves comparatively to other people. And sometimes with that comes the idea that I'm not good enough, no one's gonna like me, everyone else seems to have a life where they're together, they're happy, all that jazz. And I'm telling you, what you see on the internet is typically not the full picture. What you see on Instagram, what you see on TikTok, whatever, it's not the full picture. But sometimes we just are really scared of who we are, and so we're scared of being alone. And that could be one of the reasons why you're having a hard time being alone. There's also this idea, I don't know why, where it's like, if I'm 30 years old and not married, I might as well be 55. My eggs are dried up, or the guy's like, no girl's gonna want me, right? Unless you're that 50-year-old that's looking for an 18-year-old weirdo. And here's the thing. People are getting married later. That's just happening culturally. One, because the economics of it make a little bit more sense for people. There is a lot more concern people have today about building a career and things like that and making sure they got their life together before they commit to something serious. That's actually why sex is declining among teenagers and young adults. Over the last 10 years, and actually in marriages, has been declining a lot for different reasons. But one of the reasons is people are just like, I want to have things together. So you need to know, if you are worried about being alone, so is everyone else in this room. It's very normal. In the Bible, one of the 3 things I said this month that we're basing it on is that God created us for relationship. And we want to be together. It says it's not good for man, meaning humankind, to be alone. But how do I cope with it? And I think I'm going to, again, make this as general as possible. One is this: practice actually being alone. Practice enjoying being alone. Maybe shifting from loneliness to being alone means you need to find a way where you can have like a vacation by yourself. And you can learn what it's like, the goodness of being alone. Listen, you don't have to worry about someone else's timeline. You don't have to worry about who they are, what they are, nothing like that. You can just worry about you. Practice being alone. Second thing, ask yourself, am I scared of being alone because of insecurity? Am I scared of being alone because I'm comparing myself? Am I scared to be alone because I've got history, I've got back issues, not like back issues, but like backstory issues, right? Am I scared of being alone, or am I lonely because, I've not made new friends? And here's the thing about this stage in life: your friendships will change and shift in this stage of life. And it can be very hard to know how to make new friends. Maybe that's where it's at. But whatever it is, you got to stop and ask myself, why do I feel scared? And own that reason. Own it. Don't be scared of it. Own it. And find help. And be like, what do I need to deal with? Is this a legitimate concern or is it illegitimate? Do I need help because I can't do it on my own? Where do I find the help? Do that. That's one way to cope with it. So find a way to be okay with being alone, vacation by yourself, do something by yourself, learn what it's like, great to be by yourself. Second thing is find help in those places. And thirdly, I think another thing you need to do is you need to find, if you don't have already, a great group of people, a community of people, like, small groups, that help you build new friendships and build those connections. Are you someone who complains all the time about being alone? Ask some of them. Ask them, is there something I'm doing? What can I do? How can you help me? Be honest with someone and do that. Some of the ways you can cope with it. If you find that it's like overtaking your life, it's keeping you from sleeping at night, it's keeping you from working, you are getting down on yourself, you feel depression coming on, reach out for help as fast as you can. Because it's gone to the point where you can't deal with it by your own. You need some help. Again, I wish I could say more, but we got to move on. Joint bank account. Good or bad idea? How do I better identify problems in myself that could hinder my relationship? Go ahead, you got about a minute to vote. 79% of you asking, how am I able to better identify problems in myself that may be hindering my dating ability? That's a good question. How do I better identify problems in myself that could hinder my relationship? They say that the peak of mental health is a really good sense of self-awareness. That most of us actually lack it, not because we choose to lack it, but because we've never actually developed the skills of building self-awareness. Self-awareness is a skill. It's a very hard skill. In one of my leadership small groups I do, actually, in all of them, we do this one whole class on the idea of receiving feedback. Because receiving feedback is one of the hardest things to do, but it's one of the best things to do. And I tell them, you don't wait for good feedback. You ask for it. And one of the best things you can do is, I'm not telling you to call up all your dating ventures that didn't turn out really well. You ever watch, anyways, I was going to have an Office reference, but I decided not to. That took a lot of power, inner power to do. Anyways, it's not so much asking, but you need to, maybe you don't have the ability to do that, but maybe you've got some friends and you need to ask, hey, listen, is there a reason why my relationships are not working out? Or do you think that there's any yellow flags in my life that I need to be paying attention to? Like, for example, like, do you find me that like I'm get angry really fast? This is what I hear from them when they tell me. They tell me that like I keep showing up late. Well, maybe you just keep showing up late. That's why they're not working out, right? Or it's just like maybe you're too scared. You want everything to work out. I met one person, we had this great conversation a few years ago, and they would be the kind of person that shows to a date and they like share everything on the first date. And I'm like, listen, no one's committing to your life on the first date, yo. They're just committing to a small snippet of you, just like some coffee, just some dinner, right? Like, so it's one of those things you need to get some feedback. So I would say one of the first things to do is ask feedback from people who know you, maybe people who know a bit of your history. Don't ask people who have never been part of your life before. Maybe you do, maybe at a first date and it didn't go really well. Maybe you're like, hey, I totally get it, and I don't know if you want to be like, hey, is there like something specific? Maybe like, you know what, it's just, I don't feel like I'm compatible. That's something you can't change. It's just who you are. Another thing too is, I think it's really wise for you to think through, if I want to have a healthy relationship with someone, what resources do I need to be reading or interacting with to help identify places in my life where, hey, maybe I can do this a bit better. The one thing I don't want you to do is become super obsessed about this, that you become like a dating expert, because there's a part of it that's really organic. If you just don't match up, then you just don't match up. And if you're like, maybe you're someone who plays the field all the time and you got tons of, things going, it's like, yeah, I got some business, I got some, anyways, and but how do you know that? Unless you're actually looking into it and you're reading about it, you're trying to figure that out. So that's one way you build self-awareness, is that you allow experts, not just friends, to speak into your life, but you allow experts to speak into your life and be like, maybe that's it. The other thing is when was the last time you did some sort of introspection? When was the last time where you thought, like, am I the kind of person I'd want to date? I wouldn't hit home, I don't think so yet, and that's a good question to ask. And I'd say this, here's the thing, we all hate it. We all hate criticism. We all hate when it hits us right in the middle of the forehead and we're like, yeah, it's big. We hate it, but if you don't know the problem, you'll never find a solution. And so asking yourself the question, would I be someone I'd want to date? Well, it's like, maybe not. Well, then maybe I got to think through that. So what you want to do is build as much self-awareness as possible without really obsessing over it, knowing that there's some of it that just happens organically. And a lot of times, some issues that come out in your dating relationships actually come out in your friendship relationships too. Like some aspects or character traits about you that maybe throw someone off, and be like, hey, listen, you wear your heart on your sleeve. Remember, you're like, you don't even have a heart, right? And that's the problem. You keep taking them to Montana's. Like, that's not a good first date. It's messy, right? Like, or maybe all your dates always involve watching something and you're never interacting or talking. Maybe you don't know that you're very bad at being vulnerable. You don't know how to share about how you're feeling. Maybe you don't even really have a good sense of who you are and what you want to do with your life. Well, that can be breed a lot of insecurity in a relationship, where it's like, well, if you don't know who you are, what you want to do, that could change, which means that could change our dynamic really quickly. So you don't know unless you ask. And I think that's the best thing I can tell you is ask. Ask people who know you really well. Ask experts who know better than you. And then ask yourself, is there anything I notice? And take some time to really think through that. So those are a few things I would tell you to do. Joint bank account, good or bad idea? There's only like 20% of you that cared about that. And so, next question. Is living together a real big no-no? When dating for a long time, we're thirsty, but we aren't ready to marry. Is it even healthy to hold out? Okay, 53% of you want to know, is living together a real big no-no? That was actually pretty close. Maybe some disappointed people in this room. Is living together a really big no-no? So, if you're kind of new to the church world, and maybe you know this already, but I kind of mentioned it before, we really do think that the best case scenario is for people to begin living together when they get married, mostly because it's like, when people tell me, we've been living together for 2 years, we've never touched each other's bodies, I'm like, okay. But I want to go beyond it because I know that a lot of people are like, well, that's just a cop-out. That's a cop-out to say. Don't, because God says no. Now, there's Paul, the same guy I was talking about before, and he wrote to this church in this place called Corinth. And he says, listen, if you guys are having a really hard time keeping your hands off each other, he's like, why don't you just go get married? Just get married. Don't burn with passion and make it that much more difficult on you. Just get married. And he was talking to a very specific group of people, but there was a concept that, again, there is this ethic for it's like, no, we live together and get married. But I want to explain why I think it's important. Very fascinating research has been done over decades about couples who cohabitate and live together. Interestingly enough, couples who end up living together for a number from months to years, there is no correlating evidence that it shows that they are better prepared for a better marriage later on. There's zero evidence for it. In fact, they say that couples that end up living together before they get married are 30% more likely to get divorced. It also says that a couple, when they begin to cohabitate, there's a 20% chance, 20% of women that begin living together with someone end up getting pregnant in the first year. They also say that couples who live together and have kids, by the time their kids reach 16, 75% of those couples aren't living together anymore. For some reason, there's a 33% increase of child sex abuse and violence when a mother is living with someone who's not the father. Also, and this is I didn't go Christian studies on cohabitation. This is general advice that they're saying, actually. Comparatively to couples who have kids when they're married, only a third of those couples end up not living together by the time their kids are 16 years old. Another part of it too, and one of the reasons why they're linking to a lot of divorce when it comes to people cohabitating, is because when a lot of people begin living together, first of all, the girl tends to look at it differently than the guy does. The girl looks at it, interestingly enough, to be to prepare for marriage, to what would marriage be like and how would this help us out? Now, like I said, there's no linking evidence that actually helps anything, but the lady or the girl comes into it where the guy comes into it thinking, good, this is more economical. We can have sex whenever we want. I don't have to go home late at night. It's easier. And what happens is it only takes about 3 to 4 months for the couple to slip into what's called cohabitation mode, which means, we don't really have to get married anymore. And there is a sense of why get married? We're kind of living together, and habits begin forming, and after a bit of time, because so much invested into it, they say a large portion of those couples, especially the women, say, I decided to stay married because we just already had so much between each other. And it leads to less fulfilling marriages. I've said this before, it's called the sunken cost fallacy. It is that you put so much time and effort into a relationship that it's going to cost you way more to get out of it. That's a fallacy. But it is believed in a huge, a gross amount, especially when a couple ends up living together. They also say that couples or people who live with someone and then end up living with another person, I mean a couple, not just a roommate, but let's say you're dating someone, you live together and you break up, you live with someone, or it is actually the best and greatest indicator of future divorce. Because they've gone through the process of actually stepping out of a relationship and going through the whole breakup process and dividing things again, where it's actually, they believe that it can be done later on. And so I would say this, because there's really no evidence of it actually helping you out, not only do I biblically think it's a bad idea, but I think practically it's not a very good idea for you. And they say, though, that what helps curtail this is the older a person is and the longer that they've dated. And they say that 60% of 18 to 22-year-olds who get married, 60% of them end up divorced by 32 years old. Huge. But they say couples who end up getting married beyond 23 years old, it drops down to 30%. The reason why this is because, I don't know if you know this, but physiologically, the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of your brain that helps rationalize decisions and emotions, are only fully formed by about 26 years old. And they say that couples who end up dating older and getting married older actually tend to have a higher satisfaction in their marriages. The reason why is because they actually have the capacity to make decisions about the kind of person they want to spend the rest of their life with. I'm not saying if you're under 23, you're dumb if you get married. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, though, is what I'm trying to get at is if you actually want to know what someone's like, give them time to grow up, give yourself time to grow up, and give it some time to ask really, really great questions. I'd also encourage you, if you are someone and you have the economic ability, not everyone does, and I don't think you have to do this, but one thing that helps is if you spend a bit of time living on your own, and you figure out what it's like, and you figure out what they live like on their own. If they are a slob, guess what you're adopting, right? Like you're adopting the slob, right? You love that slob. She's cute, but she's a slob, right? And but you give them time to process that. The idea is this, and I tell most people, you want to be with someone who has a good sense of who they are and where they're going. They may not have all of life figured out, but they've got a direction in their life. And so what are these really big things that you're scared about? Why are you wanting to live with them? Because statistically, it's not going to help you to live with them to actually figure anything out. So you need to be stepping back and going, okay, what questions am I going to be asking? What time do I need to give to this? And how do I ask those things? How do we have those conversations? And I think, honestly, I'm going to be very, and hopefully I don't sound like a jerk, but I got to say this, guys. When a girl says that they want to spend their life with you, it means that they don't want to do life for you. They want to do life with you. They want to build. It's a joke until you're married. And then you realize, they say some of the difference. When a couple decides to get married and they're not living together, they both have committed to going, no, we're going to commit to building a life together, build a home together, and do this together. Whereas when a couple is kind of just living together, they're just kind of trying things out. There is a huge difference. Also, they say that couples who don't live together and are actually married couples, they actually end up making more financially. They make more money. Biggest reason why is because they feel the weight of responsibility of that commitment of I do. I'm committed to take care of this girl, I'm committed to take care of my kids, I'm committed to take care of my home, take care of my husband. We work, we do that and they actually end up economically making more money throughout the years. So, is living together a real big no-no? That is actually totally up to you. You got to make that decision. I think for a Christian, I think the Bible makes it pretty clear what that is, but again, you're an adult. You got to make those decisions. I'm not going to tell you what to do, what not to do. I'm just telling you the facts, okay? Can we leave it at that? Okay. By the way, the second question, you won't burst. If you're worried, you won't burst and you won't die. You don't. But can I just add one thing to this? I have told a few couples this. Again, you don't, like kind of what I said in the first one, you don't want to see how close to the line. You know, if you're like, well, we have oral sex. That's not real sex. Well, it's got sex in it. But the idea is if you're doing something that's only perpetuating lust, making it hard, well. Then it is actually, you're creating your own problem. But I say this, there are some Christian couples that are hypersensitive to this, and I'll say this. There is something about human touch that we all need, and part of it is a security. And I think even if you're not married, you need to be building intimacy physically. And I think you can do that through touch. I think it needs to be appropriate to the time span of your relationship. And so if you're looking at marriage a couple years out, then it's not like you don't start hot and heavy, right? You start slow and steady. And so it's like we hold hands, we give each other a kiss, and we cuddle and do those things. We make sure we set those boundaries up. And you need to have those conversations. You need to have that because you don't want it's not going to be like, oftentimes we've told people, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. And then when they get married, there's so much guilt because we've done a bad job of telling you that physical component of your life, sexual desire is good. If you're not attracted to that person, you're gonna have a terrible marriage. And so there is an aspect that you need to do it. You can't go extreme on both sides. And it's being able to invite people into the conversation to help you create those borders, to have those discussions, to be like, how can I show you security through touch and love through touch without making you feel like I'm trying to take it any further, okay? Next question, I think is the last set. What does vulnerability look like with the opposite sex outside of a dating relationship, and at what point is divorce a viable option? You got 1 minute, and these are our last set of questions. 71% of you wanted to know, what does it look like to have a vulnerable relationship with the opposite sex outside of a dating relationship? That looks like the friend zone. I can just share all my emotions. He's the best friend. Yeah, a friend. That's what I want to be. That seems like the perfect description for a friend-zoned relationship. Well, what does vulnerability look like with the opposite sex outside of a dating relationship? A really good question. People said, like, can you be friends with the opposite sex? Of course you can. If you can't be friends with the opposite sex and all you see them as a sex object, then that's your problem, not theirs. I think it's good to have some vulnerability with the opposite sex. I think the problem you have to understand, though, is that the minute you begin opening up and being vulnerable it can create some of those feelings, and you can cross borders in a sense where it's just like, oh my goodness, I actually think I like this person. And you could actually be invoking something in someone that A, you're not intending, and B, can come across like you are intending it. And so I'd say if you're going to do that, I think you got to be pretty careful with what you're vulnerable with. I always say, like, especially in marriage, I always tell people, like, listen, the most intimate part of your lives you should be sharing with, if it's other than your wife, should probably be someone of the same gender. I don't think that there's any way to create more insecurity for your significant other by sharing all your vulnerable pieces of your life with the opposite gender, the opposite sex. And what you want to do in any relationship, and in any marriage especially, is build security. Trust is something that you don't own. Trust is something that you consistently build at. And I think if you're a guy or a girl and you've got a lot of vulnerable relationships with all these guys, if you're a girl, and all these girls, if you're a guy, you're inviting a relationship where they're feeling probably like they got to compete with all those people. And you're kind of doing that to yourself. And so I would say, you know what, if you are going to have a vulnerable relationship with the opposite sex and you're not looking for anything more, I think you just got to limit how much you share. I think it's great to share about, like, who you are and what you want to do in your life and some of the things that you're going through. But I think to allow people into the very, like, recesses of your heart, into the very places of who you are and allowing them to shape you and stuff like that, I think you need to, as much as possible, keep that with the same gender, and then just be very careful with how you share that with the opposite gender. I can't spell it out for you about what conversations can you have, shouldn't have. All I'm saying is you could create something you don't mean to create. And let's say you're in that right now, where it started really organic, you're really good friends, but now, like, you feel like the person has feelings for you, or you have feelings for someone, and they're not reciprocating that, or you're confused about it. Well, you can be a child and avoid it, or you can be an adult and bring it up. Hey, just to let you know, when you're sharing with me, it makes you feel like you want me to be part of that life, be someone special in your life, and I just don't reciprocate that. I want to be a friend of yours, but maybe it's just a little bit too much for me. Is that what you're trying to get across? Or you have the opposite conversation, right? And so I think you got to be really careful with how you do this. I think you can be getting something across you don't mean to. So I'd say just be really careful. And I just think too, a really great marriage requires really great friends. And you should have friends that know who you are, that know the parts of your life and the intimate parts of your life that you can be vulnerable with and practice vulnerability with and practice intimacy with and things like that. And have a good set of guys that you can be honest with and talk about stuff. Girls, have the same thing. It'll make your relationships better. It'll make your marriages better. But be very, very close. You need to ask yourself a question. If I were to date someone, would they feel like they got to compete with them? Would they have to compete? Would I give any reason for them to think that there's something between us that they'll never be able to get into? If you're really serious about building a relationship, a long-lasting, healthy relationship with someone, I think it's just best to keep that between you and the same gender. Like I said, you have every right to disagree with me. And I don't know everything. But I have seen time and time again where we've had this, where some people feel like I don't have the same relationship he's got with that girl, or I don't have the same relationship she has with that guy. And I feel like I'm competing all the time. You've got to pay attention to that. You've got to listen to it, and you've got to actually handle it and nip that stuff in the bud, or it's going to become a huge problem. And so if you're going to do it, make sure it happens organically. It's in a friends group. You're sharing things, but it can very, very quickly lead to like a level of emotion that you're not meaning it to. And so I would say it's always, always good to be very careful with what you share and how you share it and when you share it. If you are developing, let's say you are sharing things, you're like, wow, I actually think this relationship could work, have that conversation as quick as possible. Because they could be leading you on and they're not even trying to. And so just have that conversation early on. If they're like, oh, you know what, like that's not really angle I want to go at, then you're like, okay, I got to pull back a little bit in what I share and how I share. Cool. Guys, there's a lot more we could do. And so just so you know, over the next number of months, every single week, we're recording more digital content that it can be downloaded. They're only about 10 to 15 minutes long. They're only audio so that you can just listen to them on your way to work. You can listen to them at school when you're not wanting to pay attention. You can listen to at work, whatever the case. What we're going to do is we're actually going to tackle some of the questions we weren't able to. And some of them are going to be roundtable discussions with some young adults. Some of them will just be me or some of our staff. And we want to get through some of these questions so that we can better help you. And it's also something you can share with people that maybe have no contact with the project, but they would actually love to hear some of the answers to the stuff. And so that's something we're going to be doing over the next little while. And we hope it's something you engage in because we know we just can't get to everything. But we want to help you as much as possible. I hope this month has been super helpful. I hope it's been really challenging. I hope it's been really encouraging. I hope it's frustrated you. And I hope at the same time it's also given you give you something to kind of stand out and go forward with. I'm really excited about next month. We start our new series, Healthy, and all the reasons why you're not. You know, if you ever get to a point in your life where you're like, you know the right things to do, but you can just never handle it, we just kind of want to help you tackle those things in your life. Pump for it. Pump for you guys. Thanks for being here. If you have any questions about Jesus or want to know what we think and why we believe in him, I would say the best place to do is just text the word NEXT to 555-888. Get a free ebook. Other than that, guys, thanks for being part of this month. It was a lot of fun. And we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one, guys.